Hello everybody, John Parker here, Technical Director of the Arboricultural Association. I hope you're all staying safe and well at the moment. These are obviously worrying times. We've got lots of things to concern ourselves with, both in our industry and of course in the wider world. And relatively low down the list in the big scheme of things, but still quite frustrating, is the fact that there's very little in the way of original content from conferences or workshops or seminars for us to attend where we can go and learn new things and develop ourselves. So to try and help plug that gap, even in a small way, I've been going through the archives of the recorded footage from the 2018 and 2019 Arboricultural Association amenity conferences, and I've just picked out 3 of my favourite presentations to put together in this little feature that we've called Tree of the Best, because there's 3 of them and they're about trees. See what we've done there? Pretty clever. So in this first session of Tree of the Best, we've got Tim Smit, Vikki Bengtsson and Mark Roberts, and we're going to kick off with Tim Smit from the Eden Project and his 2018 keynote speech from Exeter University, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hello everybody. I never really know what I'm going to say until I stand up, so this is a bit scary. So what I thought I'd do with because you're going to have lots of intelligent people talking to you later, and I have many of my heroes are in the room, so I feel just a little bit anxious. I thought I'd just have a 15-minute rant about what I believe the future might have in store for us, why we should be excited, why we should dare to become aggressive, and why we should discover the extrovert inside ourselves, because what we collectively represent is the dawning of a new future. I think it's also worth remembering that as we stand here at Exeter University, one of my pet themes is, of course, the first school was founded by Plato in the gardens of Academus, and the whole history of academia comes from learning within gardens, because Plato himself believed that we learnt from seeing how nature worked. And I think that is never more true than it is today, as we face some very big opportunities, and I think there's also a number of crises. You always know that there's a crisis coming on when people tell you you're living in interesting times, and interesting times they are. My pet rant, as those of you who will know me, who will see me maybe talk with my friends at the Sustainable Soils Alliance, will know that I absolutely hate the fact that academia itself has done so much damage to the professions that we are all engaged in. That we are actually sold. Wherever you go in the world today, they say, when I go to China, they say, how is it possible you have elected a government that is betraying the horticultural and agronomic country that actually has managed to populate most of the world with fertility? In China, they regard Britain as the most important country. And when the biggest fruit grower in China came to stay with me in Cornwall, he gave a very large donation, not to us, but to some very well-known fruit growers. Because he said, my entire fortune was dependent on British expertise, and they're getting no money from the government. Which seems very funny, he said, in a country that's an island. It's a very funny question, isn't it? Well, you're an island. How come you're not able to feed yourselves and you're not researching food? So my theme for today is aggression about academia. I believe that we need to reposition, and at Helligan we're doing that, and at Eden we're doing that by starting degrees in agronomy, and we've got 120 students already in their 3rd year of an agronomy degree. And what we're doing is, I don't know how many of you know this, but I'm a Dutchman by birth, and in Holland, if you are a horticulturist, you are a professional. You're expected to have a nice car. You're expected to be able to afford a house. You are regarded with the same status, if not a superior status, to a lawyer or an accountant. So what has happened in our country? And I think the only way that we can fight this is by recognizing that we are at the dawn of a completely new world of science. And the Australian comedian, Tim Minchin, said, what do you call today the alternative medicine of 30 years ago? Medicine. And what is being talked about today, soils and trees, is actually incredibly pertinent to the world we're going into. We're at the fledgling stages of people understanding that. But at Eden, we just did this exhibition on the human microbiome. And you'd have thought that people wouldn't be very interested. We have about 50,000 people a month coming to see this exhibition on the microbes in the human gut and what's on our bodies, and people are just absolutely riveted. Then the very final part of our exhibition is demonstrating that in the world of mycorrhiza, you are seeing a hint of what's inside us. So the thing that was hippie shit in the 1960s, we are stardust, we are one. We are on the verge of a revolution in which we start to see science in a complete way, in a completely new way. Permission is being granted. A bit like you used to be a hippie if you talked about rewilding. You were a hippie actually probably up until about 18 months ago, until it started to become government policy. And isn't it amazing that once government starts to think it's a good idea, everybody thinks, oh, we thought about that all the time. It's the same principle as, have you ever met a banker over the last 10 years who didn't see it coming in 2008? Everybody reinvents their past. But these are very important moments for us, and why this conference is so important is it's so rare that you get so many talented people in one place that can go out and tell other people about the fact that there is a new scientific dawn. The issue is that what we're engaged in is hugely important. It is actually planetarily important, but because of the way we speak, the language we use, we somehow feel self-deprecating about the science that we know, about the way that we view the world. Why is it, though, that if you go to China, President Xi, over the last 18 months, has made over half a dozen speeches at the big agricultural institutes, starting with the slogan, heal the soil, heal the soul. All over China you're getting this. That's why they've planted more trees over the last 3 years than the rest of the world all put together. Whatever you think about China, you are looking at a country that is going to the lengths of even re-evaluating what its state, quotes unquote, religion is. Soft Taoism is in. And what that means is working with the weft and weave of nature is the way that China is going to go. Eden is building 3 projects in China. We're building a project in Qingdao on the coast, small city of 10 million. We're building at Yan'an, the most famous city in China that no one outside China has ever heard of. It's where Mao Zedong led the revolution, and we're anticipating becoming the second most visited destination there after Mao Zedong's hut, where every Chinese person once in their life, a bit like if you were Islamic, you'd go to Mecca, you go to Yan'an to be photographed with a Bakelite telephone in Mao's desk. But what is amazing in China is that they have suddenly got it, and so many of you in your 40s and below, your contemporaries in China are starting to see a vision of China coming out of huge consumption, realizing they cannot go down that route. So there's a kind of spiritual urgency which is linked to the work that you're doing. It's fantastically important. The stories I tell when I go to China about the Eden projects that we're doing, not in China, we're involved with 3 wild projects. We're doing one on the island of Aldabra. Many of you will have heard of it. It's the Galapagos Island, if you like, of the Indian Ocean. If you want an object lesson in the power of nature, go to Aldabra. The best reefs you'll ever find, I'm a diver, anywhere in the world. They're absolutely astonishing. There's been no fishing there since 1963. And there's a lagoon in the middle of it. It's like a giant bagel. It's a lagoon so big you can't see across it. But everywhere you go, there are mangroves. And when you dive and you lie in the shallows and you see the life, ladies and gentlemen, it is astonishing. When the mangroves are actually allowed to thrive, you are creating the world's greatest creche. So to see that, I then traveled to our other project. We've got 3. Our other project, which is in Costa Rica. We were given a 10,000-acre rainforest. I met a guy in a lift in London who said, can I sell you something? And he said, my family have just inherited a 10,000-acre estate and we don't know what to do with it. And my grandfather and my father were mad and help. And so I flew to Nicoya, and they hadn't told me the great story. I thought I was going to see a boring rainforest, because let's be honest, rainforests in Costa Rica, they're like the cliche of our generation, aren't they? So I go to this rainforest to discover the one thing they should have told me to get me really excited was that their father had bought 42 farms, all so arid that the farmers could make no living from it. And he had made his money out of burglar alarms. So he said, I'm going to build a bloody great fence. And he built this bloody great fence around the 10,000 acres. And he said, I don't want any humans in here. I'm going to let the birds shit it back into fertility. Today, there is the most astonishing second-generation rainforest, absolutely bursting with life. But the really cool thing isn't that. The really cool thing is that when we went to the local village of Paquera with about 8,000 people, we were guests of honor because the brothers who'd inherited this land and given it to us wanted to give the water rights to the people of Paquera. Get this, up to about 10 years ago, there were murders every year because of the lack of water. There was drought for 5 months. The mayor gets up, this is a blue-collar guy, and makes the best speech I've ever heard about why it's important to save the environment. He said, we've been given a second chance. We've been given a second chance. Now, 4 rivers run 365 days a year. And you can see the mists every morning rising out of the forest. And our farmers can grow in the land nearby. It is a gift from God. Now, you and I may differ over whether it was a gift from God or whether it was actually the gift of actually allowing nature to do its stuff. But this soil is becoming fertile, and the farmers want to talk about how they can sustainably grow. And you can start to see a vision of a future that remains ours to make, still in the bones of stories like that. The third project we have is in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. About 2 years ago, I was in California, and I was asked whether I wanted to work on a project that was about the propagation of giant sequoias. And I said, look, giant sequoias are amazing, but I hate to sound arrogant. I've got better things to do with my life than start a small project with sequoias in America. And their main sponsor said, well, what would you consider big enough then? And I said, as a joke, buy me the last big sequoia forest in private hands. And he did. So we have a 472-acre sequoia grove right next to the Sequoia National Park. Now, for many of you in the room that are climbers, you will find this a really trivial story. But for me, a man of 64, scared of heights, the bravery I showed last year in climbing this tree, I realized 2 things. I realized, 2 minutes have I got left? 4 minutes. I realized 2 things. One is that I was more scared of being thought a coward than I was of death. So I allowed 2 very strong men to drive me, to pull me up to the top of this tree. But do you know what it feels like being the top of a giant sequoia? This particular sequoia is possibly even bigger than the General Sherman, which is supposed to be the biggest. It is a monster. And when you get to the top, you look one way and you look over Sequoia National Park. And you turn your head just 180 degrees and you see over there Death Valley. And it's like a biblical moment in terms of the opportunities or threats that might face you, regardless of the fact that there are other factors at play. But the thing that really humbles you is that under your hands, in the soft, furry bark of that sequoia, you realize this bastard has lived 4,400 years. And in that time, it has seen, to my certain knowledge, 37 civilizations start, peak, and die. And you wonder to yourself, it's a bit of a hippie thought, don't you? But you wonder to yourself, maybe we could learn a thing or two by working out how these marvelous giants can thrive. And I say it not with any sense of joke. I say it that actually what needs to happen, in my view, is that our profession needs to be brave enough to have a philosophy that is both based in science and the clear understanding of the observable empirical facts of botany and associated sciences, as well as a spiritual awareness, a spiritual with a small s, which recognizes the complexity of the world around us, has so many fantastic lessons to teach us. But the great danger, going back to the fact that we are now in a university, is the universities stole our clothes. It is the universities that have told everybody that they invented science. And they bloody didn't. Most of the Industrial Revolution was led by blue-collar people in sheds. And what they did by the time they got to the end of the 1800s to around the 1870s, when death truly occurred, that is when ologies and isms divided the world into small fractal parts So we stopped seeing the world as a whole. The future is for us to rediscover what used to be called by Darwin, Lyell, Huxley, natural philosophy. We need to teach people that things are all related. They are interrelated. That is the future for us. Really, that's the future for us. So I would like to leave you with the thought that we need to be bold and create a profession that has a spiritual engine and a scientific heart. We also need to realize that the changes that are needed all around us are very, very significant, and that if we aren't bold and we allow people to describe us as just tiny bits in that engine, we're doomed. That's why I want to speak to you today. That's why I'm so excited to have so many heroes in the room who will have said things far, far better and more intelligently than I will. But please, please, please do not see this as a conference you have come to just to pass the time. I would like it if everybody in 5 years' time said, blimey, that was the time when we started to grow some muscles, when we decided to be aggressive about our ambition and to influence the universities and great academies and those who make policy, that natural philosophy is going to be the future way for our studies. Thank you very much.
Fantastic stuff there from Tim Smit at the 2018 conference. Now we're going to move on to the 2019 conference and Vikki Bengtsson from Pro Natura in Sweden and her presentation entitled Veteranization Using Tools Instead of Time.
My husband suggested I should actually have a beard and ask if there were any women present, but I won't do that. And Simon also suggested that instead of using tools instead of time as my title, I should have perhaps said Vikki the Tree Torturer. So just that will give you, I guess, a bit of an indication as to what I'm going to talk about over the next half an hour or so. And I guess, though, to follow on a bit from what Ted started with this morning, I mean, I am an ecologist, so, you know, maybe I'm a cat amongst the pigeons here, I'm not sure. But I've always been fascinated by understanding trees and their evolutionary history. Why do they do what they do? And watching them, looking at them, and I know all of you in the room do the same. And it's been one of the great privileges that I've had over the last 25, 30 years working with tree people and observing what we see and trying to interpret what we see. So I think for me, this kind of whole idea of trees responding to what I would call natural disasters or browsers, that we've got both of those things. And I guess the question we would all ask ourselves is, which one of those do we fall into? Well, I think today I'm well and truly a natural disaster, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I did talk to the conference about 6 years ago, a very short presentation about veteranization. So Simon wanted me to just briefly go through again, just for those of you who don't remember, because I know that most people remember about 5% of presentations that are given at conference, so especially on Wednesday morning. So what is veteranization? Why and how do we do it? Where do we do it? Does it work? I guess that's the million-dollar question. A few conclusions in the future. This is one of my favourite trees at Hatfield Forest, a pollarded hornbeam. So what is veteranization? Well, I think torturing trees, perhaps, is the term we might use, but actually it's a nature conservation tool. And we see it as damaging live young trees. And we're not aiming to kill them, just for them to suffer. And it's absolutely never on veteran trees. And that, you know, that's a really important point. I've heard people describe veteranization in all sorts of different ways. And I just want that to be really clear today, that we're talking about using younger trees that we might otherwise remove. And it's nothing new, actually. We've been doing it for about 4,000 years by pollarding. And I think that's where some of the inspiration for me came along, that looking at pollards and seeing that they seem to be hollowing much more quickly than other trees or open-grown trees. But the Aussies are doing it for parakeets, Ted, actually. In America, they've done some work creating cavities and trying to see what birds were using them. I know in Italy, they've done some work on Quercus rubra. So, you know, there's been this kind of co-evolution going on over the last 2 or 3 decades with people thinking along the same lines. And then I absolutely loved, did you see Planet Earth with the bears? Yeah, please, you know, the whole kind of rubbing themselves up against the trees. Well then, actually at the same time as I saw that, there's a paper being published about bears as ecological engineers. So I'd like to think of all of us in the room today as being ecological engineers, that the role we play in an ecosystem is just as important as the bears, but we might use other tools. So again, coming back to this point about mimicking nature, I'm an ecologist, so I'm interested in trees, but I'm also interested in everything that lives on them. How do they get there? Why do they get there? What brings them there? And I hope that some of the work that we've been doing with veteranization might also teach us more about those relationships. This is just an example of a site in North Spain where they've been topping stroke pollarding, and the trees they've got, internal roots, they've got hollows and holes, they've got wet pockets, but the trees are probably only about 120, 130 years old. They grow faster. There's quite a lot of rain in that part of Spain, but it just was a real fantastic site to go and run about. I mean, Duncan yesterday was talking about all the photographs he's collecting. Well, I'm collecting lots of photographs of trees that have been damaged. And I'm not going to say anything about municipal tree surgery, of course, but, there are lots of good examples of work. Simon even said to me in the pub on Sunday night that his early years were making sure after tree pruning that you couldn't see that any trees had been pruned or any branches had been there. I guess that's what I'm doing now as well, so it's great, reinventing wheels. So why do we need to veteranize? I'm going to do this quite quickly, so, keep up. We've got sites with old trees, and many of you know that lots of those sites have just got a few trees left. And they're small, they're isolated. I mean, those of us working with nature conservation know basically we're buggered, because the sites we're protecting are just not enough. They're far too small, isolated. We've got vast areas of agricultural land and forestry land which is hostile to biodiversity. And we've got age gaps. So we may have 5 old, fantastic trees and then nothing. 200-300-year age gaps. We know we're losing species, and we know we're losing species we don't even know about. And it's scary. And then we've got tree diseases. Ash dieback. In Sweden, we've got Dutch elm disease that we're facing now, much later. Oak. I mean, I don't want to depress you, but these are the problems that we're facing, with regards to the long-term future of our very special and our most special trees. And to quote Ted, they're our rainforest. So I guess the point is time is not on our side. And I think that's where I'm coming from, that, what can we do? I'm impatient. I want to see results. I want to try and do something. And I'm sure that's something we all share. And just last week we were in Sweden, and we were a bunch of people climbing about in this absolutely, I think the technical term is stonking ash. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. I think it was about 9.5 meters round, and it succumbed to ash dieback in the last 12 months. And, it's got a list of red data book species as long as your arms and legs. But, it's got a time limit as to how long it's going to be there. I mean, it will hopefully be there another couple of 100 years, but it's not going to produce any new habitat, that particular tree. And then, just to wind Ted up, I've put a picture of beetles in. Those of you will know Ted likes to call beetle people pin stickers. But actually, I work in Sweden, and this particular beetle earns every year around about 5 million euros for nature conservation. So I bow to the beetle right now. This one, hermit beetle, we don't have it in the UK, and I keep meaning to bring it over in my rucksack. And the work that's, there's been some work done across Europe regarding the ecology of these species. And the bit that frightens me is in 2012 there was a report produced by the IUCN, and they said 11% of saprophilic beetles are under threat. 2018 they published a new report, and it's gone up to 18%. And it's really scary. That's all happening fast around us while we're sitting here having a lovely time drinking beer. And it is one of the most threatened species community in Europe. I'd like to say that we know that's probably true for all the other communities associated with old trees, but beetles, we've actually got some data and knowledge. So where do we do it? Well, this is a lovely site we also visited last week in Sweden. Beautiful, ancient oak tree with a whole bunch of tree nerds running around trying to find more. Well, there weren't any more. There was this one. I think there was one other on this site. So where do we do veteranization? It's these kind of places where we've got one or two few old trees and then we've got lots of these kind of trees. And Reg, you'll recognize yourself there on that picture. So I'd say these trees, and I'm sorry to those of you that are foresters in the room, boring, lollipop, straight trees without anything interesting going on if you're an ecologist. They are the kind of trees that are just perfect for doing this kind of torturing work too. But back to this point about, how do we do it and what do we do? It's using nature as our guide. The picture on the right here, you can see, I don't know if the pointer works, that's a black woodpecker hole, but you can see there's a branch that's ripped off. It's got some nice decay happening there. Well, how does this happen? It's wind damage probably in this particular instance, but we don't actually know all the processes that lead up to that particular. And the black woodpecker is the only woodpecker that will actually make holes in live wood. So, what's coming first, the woodpecker or the decay? We don't really know the answer to that. So, one of the techniques we've been looking at is ring barking large branches, because on oak we know, for example, that shade creates that kind of environment. We also know that dead branches that are shaded out, which then fall off, are often where we get really good cavities with that particular beetle that I showed you before that lives in. So it's using nature as our guide, thinking about, okay, well, these are the sorts of features that we find on our oldest trees that also have some of our rare species in them. How can we recreate those using tools? Now, I say that with the royal we, because often people like Reg and others are the ones helping us out and doing the work. But there are about 20-odd different techniques, and Reg normally every year comes up with a new one. I'm not saying anything more about that, to surprise me. But, there may be many more techniques out there. And I just wanted to show you a short film. It's very quiet.
Access within trees much quicker and easier. The small holes made by the spikes are an additional form of damage or veteranization. This first example involves making a nest box in a living tree. Here, a wedge of wood is removed, the top cut off, and also a slice from the inside of the wedge. It is then replaced as the front of the box. The top of the tree is also removed to ensure that it does not fail where the nest box has been made. Holes can be drilled into live trees to mimic woodpecker holes. Here, 5 are drilled in a row, some 4 centimetres in diameter and 6 centimetres deep. In this technique, the bark, including all living tissue outside the sapwood, is removed from the base of the tree to a height of about 1 metre and mimics horse damage. This stripped area should not exceed 1/3 of the trunk girth. Ring barking causes the slow death of a branch or a tree by interrupting the flow of water and nutrients. In this example, bark and cambium are removed from all around the branch along a length of approximately 20 centimetres. To try and encourage basal decay, the base of the trunk is hit with a sledgehammer over an area which is about 1/3 of the girth up to a height of some 20 centimetres.
I'd just like to say that last one was David Lonsdale's idea. Honestly, it was. There's a whole film, you'll recognise Helen's voice there. Those films we produced as a part of the previous European project that I was project manager for, Veterinary. There's some great training material there, so if you're interested, they're all available free and to download. So I'm just going to move on now to, this started, I guess, as something that many of us at different places were doing when we were restoring wood pastures, because it was like, well, why are we felling trees when actually we could do something else with them? So that's really where it started. And for the last 15 or so years, I've been bringing Swedes from Sweden to have a look at nature conservation of wood pasture work in the UK. And I go to Hatfield Forest, where I used to work, and show them some of the trees that we've tortured. And about 6 or 7 years ago, there were 2 of the guys that was with, a guy called Jonas Edin and Mats Niklasson, and they got me in the bar after we'd been to Hatfield Forest and said, "So Vikki, where's all your data about how well it's worked?" Well, I haven't really got any. What? But you must have done. You must have had controls, and you must have done a certain number of trees, and you must have decided which ones you were going to do, and which direction did you do it, which cardinal point, how high were they, what was the vitality of the trees before? That's a really good question. So we kind of sat there and drank a few more beers and discussed about, well, actually, this could be a really valuable tool for nature conservation, but to justify the cost, we actually ought to set something up whereby we might be able to get some proper results and share those results. And so around about 2010 and 11, this developed into an idea where we thought, let's get a network of sites. We wanted 10 sites, and we started in Sweden, but I was feeling slightly nationalistic at that point and felt like we needed to get some sites in the UK involved. So in the end, we got 20 sites up and running, and we focused on oak. And the reason we focused on oak is because, as you all know, it's one of the trees that lives longest. It's also one of the trees that has the greatest biodiversity associated with it. And often that's where we've got a big age gap. So this trial was set up in 2012. We had 3 groups of arborists who undertook the work across these 20 sites. We actually damaged 700 trees, and they were all around this kind of size, 25 to 60 centimetres in size, all visibly healthy, all very boring trees in my view, at least at that point. They were all tagged and photographed, and the work was done in the autumn in 2012. And we were a bit, cocky, I suppose, in that we had absolutely no money. We had no support really other than talking to people and persuading them that this was a really good idea. So each of the landowners contributed a bit of money for the work to be done. And we said, yeah, this project's going to go for 25 years. Ha! Yeah, but okay, that's really good to say that, but actually we've got no money, we've got no universities involved, we haven't got any researchers involved and so on, and we just kind of did a bit of a hope and a prayer. So got the work done. And just very quickly, we had a list of about 20 different options to do, and we narrowed it down to 5. And we wanted to have 5 so that we could have lots of repeats and lots of control trees. And we chose some techniques that would be crowd pleasers so that we might kind of, get people interested, but also from an ecological point of view, some techniques that might give us some quick wins and others that will take longer time. So this is the horse damage one that you saw in the film. This is mimicking a broken branch, so ripping that branch collar down the stem if we can. Ring barking, branch, creating woodpecker holes, and then this is my absolute favourite, which is creating a hollow inside a living trunk and knocking the top off. So those were the 5 different treatments we tried. And since then, this is kind of like a big snowball. There's been at least 3 European Union life projects. I know it hurts to say European Union, but I'm going to say it again. European Union life projects, which are fantastic for nature conservation. And there's about probably 2,000 trees that are going to be veteranized over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, with a view to doing this in nature conservation sites where wood pasture restoration is the focus. These trees would otherwise be removed. So in my mind, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We're using a material that we have that's there. If we take it away, it's gone forever. So these are some of the other techniques, mimicking lightning strikes, different variations on, hacking a big hole out of the tree, ring barking the top, and these are some of the climbing spikes. It's interesting, actually, that the Swedish arborists that I've worked with have had real trouble doing work on beech, because it's just so nice, they say to me. So using climbing spikes, I'm like, go on, really, really go for it. So it's been, it's also, this completely goes against, doesn't it, pretty much everything that most of you will have learned. And it takes a bit of time to get your head around it. But if you're clear about why you're doing it, and I think that's something that I always come back to with everything we do with regard to old trees and young trees, is using our brain, switching it on, thinking about why we're doing something, what's your objective? Because actually, we can't confine our toolbox. We've got to make our toolbox bigger. And this is one of the techniques that I think makes our toolbox just that little bit bigger. So the next question, of course, the one you're all been waiting for, is does it work? Well, this is me feeling like it was Christmas, because we went round the trees in 2014 with a ladder climbing up the tree, and it was, honestly, I was so excited. I'm like going up the ladder, what's going to be in this one, and is it going to bite me? And we've had a red squirrel in them. We've had lots of birds nesting. And in fact, I was kind of, in that sense of trepidation, delighted at seeing that birds had nested in them, but also slightly depressed because they were nesting in them only 1 year after, the following spring, which kind of makes you think, God, we must have so few holes and cavities left in our landscape that they're even using these ones. We also put up these window traps, as they're called, to look at what insects might be flying around and nosing around in our tortured trees. And so we have got some results, actually. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was actually very few trees died. I think it was something Duncan said yesterday, we should trust in trees more. And everything that I've done with this project makes me trust trees more than ever. I've always had a great trust for trees because actually they've spent 50 million years evolving and we've spent about 400,000 years, yet we know better. So, and only 3 of them have died. And I've been back to quite a lot of sites this last summer and this summer. I can't help it. It's a bit of an obsession. And no more trees have died. In fact, one's gone, but some idiots felled it. So it's got nothing to do with actually the tree mortality as such. 63% of the nest boxes had at least 1 year's nesting material inside them. 45% of the woodpecker holes I showed you had been used by birds, a third of them for nesting, but a third of them, the rest were used, I think, for overwintering. I mean, in Sweden it's cold in the winter, and the birds all huddle, and they were using these woodpecker holes as a huddle spot. We found evidence that bats had also used them, both for feeding, and I think probably we've under-recorded that because it's a bit tricky to spot them. Sap runs. I mean, it really was like Christmas because every time you came to a new site, something different had happened. The woodpeckers had hacked off all the bark on the ring-barked branch. There was all sorts of stuff happening. Some of the trees had moved, torsionally as you might expect, and there was some great cracks and sap runs, so it was fantastic. And this is Reg. This is my present. Reg is a present. I know, I really am a nerd. I got a veteranized tree in my garden, and it means that every morning I can see it out the window, and there's a little great tit been nesting. He's carrying a poo bag. So, this is 2 years ago, and the tree was done in the same year, 2012. So it's very exciting. I felt like I had a new baby. So the beetles, well, I have to say we have an awful lot of beetle and wasp and fly soup because we collected from all the traps across, I think we did 16 sites in the end, and we've now identified them all. And again, I said to you, we haven't had any money, so a lot of this has been done on a voluntary basis. And currently we have huge long Excel sheets with all the species that have been found, but we need some money to do some analysis. But actually some things that are very interesting is we got some real heavyweights out of the beetle soup in particular. We got the hermit beetle, which was so exciting. And this particular one is the marble chafer. We also got noble chafer. We got more red data book species associated with the woodpecker holes and the nest boxes than we did the controls. But we did get one at the control too. So we really need to do some proper stats on it to see what the relationships are. But it's exciting. Then we had the flies, the bees and the wasps. This one is an absolute cracker. It's a beauty. It is actually 6 meters tall. Sorry, no it's not. But it likes sap runs. It particularly liked the climbing spikes. And I think, this is back to this point again, that these species are adapted and have evolved with trees. And they're able to sniff out these things in a way that we can't, or we've lost the ability to. And this particular species is usually associated with beech. But with the climbing spike damage, with the sap runs, this is coming into oak as well. Then there were lots of hornets. I've found hornets in quite a lot of the nest box type things that are making use of them. And again, that's a species that was very much in decline. Then there are other things associated with hornets. So, we're beginning to see the patterns. Then, of course, fungi. And actually, it's Emma should be telling you all about this because she knows much more than I do. See, you're getting the blame again. Next year, Simon. For me, fungi was always going to be the interesting one because it's the decay processes that I was interested in getting going with. through damaging and torturing the trees. We all hear about dysfunction and the next step being decay. So, that's really what has been the main objective. And of course, we were really struggling to get some researchers to pick up the baton and move on it. And so I was so excited in 2017 when the Swedish Agricultural University, the mycology department, got some money for a master's student. And, said, Vikki, will you come with us? Yes, of course, I don't care if it's January. And they got some money to go and visit. I think we did 8 sites. And it was absolutely effing Baltic when we did this work. It was snowing horizontally, and I don't know how many minus it was. Actually, that is me there. You wouldn't know it because I've got so many clothes on. And that's when a squirrel came out and nearly bit one of us, by the way. And we took sawdust samples from 3 of the treatments. So we looked at control trees, we looked at the nest box and the woodpecker hole. Now, this data hasn't yet been published, and there's still more work to do, but we were blown away by the fact that there were 700 species. They call them operational taxonomic units, these folks that do DNA analysis, but basically that's equivalent to species. 700 species? I nearly fell over. The species richness is not different between the sites. So basically all trees were having at least 300 species each. And there was really not that much variation in species richness between sites and even between the treatments. But there's a difference in the species composition between the control trees and the trees that we've damaged. Actually, we looked at horse damage as well. So it's very exciting. Then the other thing that kind of blew me away was that only 25% of those 700 species identified could actually be identified, so that we had DNA for. Only 10% have been recorded from Sweden before. I mean, it's mad. It just shows you how little we know, doesn't it? Yes. And equally, these 2 species that I'm not going to say the name, but you can see it on the screen. One of them on the top was only found and scientifically recorded from Sweden as a fruit body last year for the first time. And that was the most common species that we found in the DNA sequences. We did find chicken of the woods, and we did find beefsteak, but you can see they were actually only from very few trees. 5 trees. The beefsteak was from the control tree, which is very interesting, isn't it? So it was a real shocker, actually. I know that this isn't a surprise to those of you who've been working with fungi and DNA analysis, that there are so many species. But this has led to a 3-year project in Norway called The Secret Life of Oaks. So they're looking at endophytes in oak. That project's starting now. And, I guess maybe this isn't news to any of you or to me, but I guess we're thinking that these decay fungi probably have got a latent phase or an endophytic phase in their lives. That this whole thing about, fungi coming in, we've got to change all our prepositions, I think, based on some of this work and others. But what was also very interesting was that we had very, very little decay, virtually none. And again, this is back to trusting in trees, that these are young trees, of course. They were all very vital trees, and that's very important, of course. And the decay, I was a bit disappointed, I have to admit, because I was really hoping that there would have been a bit more decay happening than there actually was. So, what happens next? Well, we've got a hell of a lot of beetles and insects and flies and wasps to analyse. And we're really hoping that another funding application is going to be successful for a PhD project. It would be great to look at all the sites and maybe do some other work in 5 years' time. I'd like to go back and look at all the trees again, because each time you go, you learn so much. You see so much happening that you perhaps didn't even think about. The questions that we're asking, there may be different answers. We may need to change the questions that we're asking. And I also think that we're learning, or for me anyway, I've been learning so much about other things. So mortality rates. You ask a stupid question like, what's the normal mortality rate for oak? We actually don't know the answer to that question. We've got lots of really good forestry data about it, but we don't have very good data about oak in a natural wood pasture type situation. This may be something that can help us answer one of those questions. What species succession do we get? Which ones come first, second, last? What stages, how long does it take? When will it feel like it's no longer clear that this has been done by a chainsaw and the natural processes will completely take over? All of those sorts of questions, and I'm sure more, will come. This is actually one of the, you can hardly tell that this has been done. So now I just want to show you a few pictures showing kind of when they were done and a few years later. So this is actually from Hatfield Forest. So this one here is 20 years old. This is the sledgehammer stuff, and I can actually get my whole hand fist in that hole at the base of the trunk. So 20 years is maybe what it's taking before you wouldn't know if you went and looked at that it had been done by a sledgehammer, would you? And it's only because I've got a tag on it that I know myself that it was done by a sledgehammer. These ones we set fire to and barbecued some sausages. But actually this was 2 years later, and it actually just looked like there was really damage on this side. But after 10 years, it's actually 2/3 of the way round exposing the wood there. And the tree ant, one of the Lassia species, has moved in here now as well. So, these are all things that we're learning, and only now you're seeing evidence in the crown of this damage, which is also quite interesting, I think, that presumably the roots were damaged first, and then the crown is responding. So, this is always the thing that I get frustrated with tree management, that everything takes such a bloody long time, isn't it? That if somebody digs through the roots to put in cable, it's only 20 years later you see the results. This is some horse damage 5 years on. You can see there's a little hole forming here and here. This is the woodpecker hole, so you can see the kind of, some of these are almost fully occluded. One of the ones that we did at Hatfield, I can get my finger in, that's all. This is some of the lovely nesting material, and it's great just to see, how they look after 5 years. You would hardly know that we'd been there. What's also interesting, though, actually, just very quickly on this, the kind of callus growth on the edge, you can actually see the form of the chainsaw on the wound wood there on the edges. So, are we on the right track? I see I've got a yellow light, that's good. This is woodpeckers, been very busy on the lid of the box. Inoculation, I know that Lynn Boddy and others are working on inoculation, and we've done some work in Sweden too, and the results are promising. That's the future perhaps, if we really want to get the fungi going. We've got so much to learn, but of course these will never be a replacement for our ancient trees in 400 years. They're a complement, and they must only be seen as a complement. They're a nature conservation tool. These are my kids actually a few years ago, and I think veteranization, whilst it's a great tool and we ought to make our toolbox bigger, we must make sure we look after these as well. And that patience is a virtue. Somebody told me the tree was kissing me. You look at it sideways. But patience, and I'm not renowned for my patience, but I think that's the thing. This is going to, the slightly cocky approach that it was 25 years is when we're going to see the results, I think is probably pretty spot on. It may even take longer. So thank you, and these are the people who've been doing all the hard work with the fungi stuff, so just like to mention them too. So thank you very much.
The final presentation of this little set is from Mark Roberts of Roberts Consulting in New Zealand. Now this might actually work if we can edit it together properly, because I was chairing this session at the 2019 conference. So through the magic of technology, reaching back through time and space, I'll hand over to Mark Roberts. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, John. Oh, you can hear me. Hello all, I am Mark Roberts. I'm from New Zealand and I do sound this way. I haven't got my clicker. I'm grateful that you're actually here. The last session on the last day of a conference, I wasn't expecting this many people, so I may waver a bit in my voice. So what one of these buttons, that one. My plan is today is to talk about lots of stuff. We'll talk about the right tree in the right place, the changing environment, who decides what we do, tree risk, urban ecology, and what we do to our trees. So each one of those bullet points fundamentally is a PhD, and I really haven't got that much time. And at the desire to have John not use the red button, I may even go short. But what I wanted to do is you've had some amazing voices and amazing people standing where I'm standing here, and in fact a bit of brains trust, and it's actually a bit intimidating for me to be here looking at the other names on the list. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question. So today I'm asking the question of you, more so than informing you of what's going on. And don't be afraid, I will be asking questions of the audience, but it's a rhetorical question. Don't answer. That'd be quite weird. So don't answer any questions. I may point to you like you have answered a question, just pretend, all right? It's part of the story. So what I want us to do today is pretend just a little bit, and I want us to start off that we have achieved all the amazing things that we can achieve. So we're talking about trees, but we want us to start off in a happy place, and a happy place is going to be that the soil conditions. We've actually, the brains are here. We can create the ideal soil conditions. We have got the ideal tree, and we have done all the things that we can do. So the starting place for this talk is that we have achieved what we can achieve. And we must be able to. There must be some point that we can achieve all the things that we can do, because we just have to. We just have to be able to do that. So that's where I want to start from. What I want to do is start off with the right place, the right tree in the right place. And as I'm saying, we've achieved the right tree in the right place because this is the pretend situation we are starting from. And as a concept, we all should be very aware of it. It's a forestry concept, comes from the sort of 20s and 30s. And if we have the right tree in the right place, well, the tree looks after themselves. And that's really nice. As a horticulturist, as an arborist, as a horticulturist, less we do, the better. And as an arborist, the best we can do is actually not do anything at all, really. We're actually a bit of a blight on our trees. But if you think about the right tree for the right place, it is completely valid. It is a lovely statement, and it is true in every way at the time of planting. And so what happened here is you've got this tree, you've selected it, it's all good. You've planted the right tree of planting, but what happens if the right place changes? What happens when the place you've put your tree in, once you've got your soil pit, your soil selection, you've used your gadgets, you've used the science, you've used the collective knowledge of this room, and then we're no longer in control of the place anymore. And there seems to be a problem. This particular tree is one of my favourite trees. There's nothing actually special about the tree. It's a radiata pine forestry tree. It's probably about 80 years old, maybe 80, 90 feet tall. It's just a tree. But the story behind a tree, so what makes something exciting is the story, and the story behind this tree is quite cool. So it's called the wooing tree, and those that kind of think that way, this may be the hint of what it's for. So it's a tree in a small central Otago town, and on the outskirts of town there was a tree. And this tree was the tree. And because surrounding this central Otago town are mountains, if you were young and you wanted to go somewhere, you couldn't go up the mountains, so you'd take those you wanted to get friendly with to this tree, and this is where you would go as the town. And time came along and they said, we must build this stuff. So all this sort of white down here is actually a vineyard. That's another reason why I like this tree. So there's a vineyard down there, and they're going to put the vineyard in and remove the tree. So far, so good, except the town folks said, no, this is not right. The town folks said, actually, a large proportion of this town was conceived under that tree, and therefore there is a connection in more ways than most with this particular tree. Perhaps not a large proportion, but enough for the town to go, actually, we love this tree. So therefore you can't chop the tree down. So here's this tree that started off being a fertile breeding ground for the future. Then it became a tree in the middle of a vineyard. And the vineyard is called the wooing tree. And if you ever get the chance to buy wooing tree Pinot Noir, do it. Lovely wine, really nice wine. But the way the world goes, this tree is now, this vineyard is soon to be removed, and a subdivision will be there. So here's this tree, starts off life most likely as a weed species, out on the edge of town. Tree's having a good time, it's growing, you know, there's a bit of life to get to that size. So the tree's got there, the site around that tree's changed, it became a vineyard. And now the site around that tree is going to change again, and it's going to be an urban development. So hold that thought. What's happening with our trees? Our trees are just trees. The site around them changes. And we are not so much in control of what happens there. So on to the next topic, the changing urban environment. And based on what we're in control of, what we're not in control of, is the changing urban environment. So World Health Organization, WHO, estimate that 60% of the world's population will live in urban areas, 60% by 2030. That's 12 years. Someone yesterday, I can't recall who it was talking about measuring time by their children, which I used to think, you know, pre-children, BC, in BC times, that was hard to comprehend, but my daughter is 18 this year. It's kind of hard to believe that 18 years have passed. I suspect 12 years will happen very, very quickly. So we have this issue where the population of the world is moving into our areas. And how are we going to deal with that? Well, clearly, the brains trust the current line of thought is, well, green our cities, because if we have green cities, we have the benefits of trees, we have greening, we have health, we have so many trees are great, we love trees. And this is what we should do. We should get trees into our cities. This is Dunedin, the city that I live in, and this is our botanic gardens. And isn't it nice? You know, you look at that, calm, beautiful. Our wara is restored. We are in a happy place. Being in botanic gardens, it's a very well-resourced garden. Well, no, it's a very well-used garden. It's probably as resourced as every other, you know, council garden in the world, so under-resourced. But it's a lovely place. It's tranquil. People go there. It was a planned garden. And it's now in the centre of town because town has evolved and gone around it. But luckily, we're keeping our garden and the urban environment is changing around it. So what's happening here is we have this dynamic nature of cities. Our cities are growing. Things are changing all around them. And our trees have to survive. And we've got these benefits trees. We know what trees can do. We know trees can help people. There's research plenty about the, you know, health benefits, the financial benefits, the air purification, just all those things that we all know. These all happen. So what we'll do is we'll just get our trees in the ground. But what's happening? What's happening with that? What's going on? Are we going to achieve these things with our trees? So jumping back into urbanisation and how things change, this is London. You may recognise it. I worked in London in the early 90s. When I moved to London, it really hadn't changed. I mean, the war had finished, and, you know, 50 years later, we were still digging bits of shrapnel out of trees, and it hadn't really changed. You could still buy maps, you could still navigate around London because it was fundamentally the same city as it was, you know, well, I wasn't in the war, but anyway, it had changed for many, many years. These buildings didn't exist. I don't even know what these things are. All these pointy, shiny things just appeared in London, and they have appeared in the last, 20 years? So based on our 12-year concept of my daughter being 18, things change really, really fast, and our cities aren't the same cities they were. The demands that is put on space in our cities is increasing and problematic. And then we have climate change, and there's been lots of people talking about climate change and some really sensible stuff, and I'm very grateful for the sensible comments about climate change. But it's nice we've got climate change, and what is interesting with climate change, we know trees can survive in a vast range. We have oak trees and English oak where I live, and they live in Sydney, and they live here, and they live so the growing range of an oak tree is vast. So 2 or 3 degrees change in global warming probably isn't going to affect the tree too much, but it is going to affect what eats the tree. So all the other pests and diseases and the beasties that come along, well, they're having a good time as well. So global warming, it's a problem. So we've got some things that we don't actually have control over. We have our pit, our trees, we're doing everything right that we can do, and then there's the things we can't control. So what do we do with that? So now we're talking about the right tree for the right place. So it's not if anymore. The right place is changing. We've got the right place, we've done everything right, but then we're not in control of everything else. And this is where things get a bit scary. So, how do we deal with that? Wow, this is nice. Who makes the decisions? Who decides what happens? Again, rhetorical question. Anyone can answer that? We do. We decide who makes decisions, and that's great because we're arborists, we're people, we are tree people, we love trees, and this is us, we're making decisions about trees. But it's not really like that, is it? It's not really like that because it's the people that vote that actually make trees. And I can't speak for this room, but the people that tend to vote tend to be the people that are really focused on car parks. And they're really focused on things that aren't necessarily tree related. Their wants aren't necessarily there. And other people that vote, and of course the people that they vote for are the ones that make the decisions. We elect the decision makers in, and the decision makers do what they do. In New Zealand we have charters, we have district plans, and there's like a 10-year master plan with what's going on. I think they call them charters over here, so you have a charter of events. Here's a plan, a long-term strategy, what we want our city to do, and it's great. But of course these are living documents, because we have to have living documents so we can change them. So you have this 10-year plan, but you've got the sort of disclaimer clause in the back of it, little disclaimer out there saying, we're going to change this plan depending on what? Depending on who votes us in. So you count your elected authority as doing this is elected authority, we're in there, and we quite like it. I quite like being an elected official now. I want to be re-elected. So you listen to your people that want car parks and you'll make change so you can be elected. That's human nature. That tends to be what happens. So this last line of text here, the mean typical life expectancy for a tree, I'm 19 to 28 years, obviously depending on the research you read, hence why there's a bit of variation in there. So we've got a tree, street tree, a tree that can live in the urban environment. If it lives past the first sort of 2 or 3 years, it might make it 20, 25 years. But that's about 5 to 8 election cycles. So those that have worked in the council, those that have worked in large corporations, we're talking corporate restructuring around this tree. This poor tree is surviving through 8 or 9 corporate restructures. I worked for one large organisation. I worked for a polytechnic. The polytechnic restructured 3 times. I hated it. I couldn't deal with it. And by the time I left, all those that could leave. And that seems to be the case. Obviously, our trees can't leave because, they're stuck in the ground. They're stuck in the right place that we've created for them. So our trees face this problem that the situation that they're in is changing. And the people that make the decisions about what they're going to do is also changing. So this is a problem. So then we get this next problem. So hold those thoughts. There's a bunch of thoughts I want you to hold. The next one is tree risk. Now, I'm not going to talk about tree risk and the risk to people because, that's another conversation, isn't it? That's a long and twisted conversation. I'm going to talk about tree risk in the terms of the tree. So how will the tree exist? I showed a lovely photo of Botanic Gardens before, and what is really nice to work with this garden is their risk is for other trees. They're actually quite annoyed that people use their gardens. So they're going, we've got a garden and we care about the trees, and this will fall over and hurt the tree, and someone might get dead, but that's okay because the tree asset is their thing. So when I talk about tree risk here, I'm talking about tree risk to the tree, the longevity of the tree. And we manage our tree risk fundamentally through pruning and our standards, and our pruning standards here, and we focus on natural target pruning, and we have techniques and practices and procedures, and we reduce the risk of premature death of the individual tree. So this is taken out of some standard. I can't recall if it's a British standard or the Australian standard, but fundamentally, this is what our pruning standards are for, so we can prolong the life of our tree, and this is great, because that's what we want. And here's our tree, and it's beautiful. So this is a beech tree. Yep, beech tree in the middle of Dunedin Gardens, and it is nearly a textbook tree, isn't it? I mean, look at it. It's early in spring, so once the leaf fills up, there's a bit of filling there, but look, isn't it beautiful? I mean, doesn't it not tick the boxes of a specimen tree. What kind of ticks the boxes. It's nearly a beautiful tree because look at it, it ticks all the shapes, and we know what trees look like because we have pruning steps. I've jumped backwards, jumped forwards, I've jumped backwards. We have our beautiful tree, it looks like a tree, and what we do is we prune our tree to look like this. This is where I'm going. We prune our tree, and our pruning stands are there to retain and to recreate the natural form and appearance of a tree. I'm told this is a slightly controversial statement to make about the natural form and appearance of a tree, but hold that thought. Our pruning stands are designed to make our trees look natural, and that's kind of what we do. So our trees look natural, and this is what our trees look like. We know this. So these are CAD trees, insert tree shape A, B and C, because, and dial up the tree and stick it in the ground, because that's what trees look like. And, I can see there's some confusion. Some people are glazing over, but you kind of go, what does this mean? Well, look, there's one. There's one of those trees that looks like that. I'm not sure this is a tree A. Tree B could look like this. So we know what trees look like because we've created the image, and now we can recreate the trees. Obviously, this is a tiny tree, but they can get bigger. And so there's a bigger trees. We can make trees look like trees because we know what trees look like because it's the natural form and appearance of a tree. This is interesting. This is Singapore. Anyone been to Singapore before? Yes, no? Excellent. This is the Gardens by the Bay. We're talking about soil and the previous speaker about where soil came from. I used to work in Singapore, and when I first was there in maybe 2000, they decided they wanted botanic gardens, but the country's actually quite small. So what they did, they just drove out to the sea for a kilometre, and they just fenced off a kilometre of the ocean. Not quite sure what resource consent issues they had, but they just fenced off an issue of the ocean. And then they went across to Indonesia and just filled it up, the soil. So now Singapore is a much bigger place than it was when I used to go there. But the other thing is all this grows. Just add water, add soil, and you get this massive growth going on. So we have our trees, we have what it look like. Now we're plugging into urban ecology and what our trees do. So focusing on our trees, again, we have Dunedin Botanic Gardens again, and we know what our trees look like. So what do we know about this? What is this? Zoo. Thank you, that was my answer. Indeed, it's a zoo. Which is quite weird, really, because you have trees that don't grow next to each other. You've got trees that aren't there. So we have this zoo that we live in, or we create. And in our pretend environment, with our pretend trees looking like pretend natural shapes, and we create this sort of stuff, and we live in it. We go there and we visit it, and we carry on with it. But actually, the urban environment that our trees live in looks more like this. This is Venice Beach, which actually nothing in the world looks like Venice Beach because Venice is just weird. But still, this is kind of the world that our trees live in. And there would have been photos of plenty of this. This is the environment that our trees live in. This is actually a planting pit through here. And you know it's a planting pit because the asphalt's there to mark where it's going to be. So, we try and grow our trees there. And it's a horrible environment for our urban trees to live in because it's just not a nice place. Road widening. Some of the forethought involved with European cities and what actually happens here is just amazing. New Zealand doesn't do that. We're a small country and we do think small. So heck, this is actually State Highway 1, which was 2 lanes at that point. Let's make it 4 lanes. That's going to account for something. So anyway, we widen the road and we do bad things to our trees, and it's not very nice for them. But actually, the poor trees live in a fairly horrible environment. So what's happening under the ground? Well, a lot is happening under the ground. And of course, they don't remove what's in it, they just put new stuff in. So under the ground, there is stuff. So the poor root plates of our trees, the poor things that our trees grow in, well, it's quite a full and busy place for a tree to be in. And of course, what's above the tree is equally full and busy. So our trees are kind of sandwiched between a rock and a hard place. They've got nothing above them to grow, they've got nothing below them to grow, but we're still making this natural shape of our tree, which we're looking after through natural pruning, and we're doing everything right for our trees to exist in the urban environment. Because we know what trees look like. We know we create nature because we're arborists, we're bringing nature into the urban environment, and that's great, and we should do that, and that is lovely. So this is beech forest. I'm not quite sure where, somewhere in Europe. Internet image, I lifted it. And this is a beech tree growing in the urban environment. You can tell it's urban environment because, multi-trunk situation, a lot of space for it to grow. This is quite sweet. I was called in to look at this tree. Mark, can you come and look at this tree? We're doing some excavation, blah, blah, blah. The soil there's probably about another 3 metres of bank down here. So this tree is actually down, just off the bottom of the screen here. And what was a bit weird is I get to the site and the council had removed the curb and channeling and put a drainage pit down both sides of the street, So I'd done this to like 50 trees on either side of the road. And they go, oh, Mark, you need to look at this tree because this tree is going to have some work done around it. And I'm kind of going, but what about those ones? What about those trees? And guess what will happen with those trees? They'll live, won't they? Because they bloody well do. Do horrible things to them and they live. And I have made words to the council, went to the planners, and went to the developers and said, look, this is what you've done. And you have to be aware you're now responsible when these trees fail. But you kind of want them to fail but want them not to fail at the same time. So this is a tree in nature. It looks like a tree in nature because it's in nature, And I have no idea why this tree is doing that. There's no obvious reason that I can think of, apart from the fact that it's pretty cool. I mean, look at it. Isn't that neat? So this is a natural photo. It's a tree. It's just doing what it does. This one over here is bent. There's some dead wood up here. There's just stuff, and it's natural, and it's not conforming to the image of a natural tree because we don't prune our trees to look like that, so therefore it can't be natural. We want our trees to be natural, so we have this sort of stuff. So we have our trees in the urban environment. We transpose that urban environment into our cities and towns. This is Sydney. This is clearly the obvious growing environment. So this is a very similar environment to this. We can tell that because this looks like that. No, this looks like that, which looks like that. Oh, we're going the wrong way. This looks like that, which looks like that. So have anyone been to the outback of Australia? Again, this is not a crocodile. This is a tyre, right? Because nothing lives there, So we have this growing environment that much better resembles, if I can go backwards, so nature, recreate nature in our cities. Our cities actually look like this. So we're now trying to grow things in that. And that may seem ridiculous. I can think, let's see, where's he going with this? But look at that. Is there not? Are these not the same? Oh no, so now we're sticking these trees in the ground, dig a hole, and yes, I did ask, when we started the journey we were on was the fantasy hole with the soils, with the tree selection, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it doesn't happen, So we stick a hole in the ground, plonk a tree in it, put a grate on it, maybe some lights, because you've got to have lights in there as well, and it's beautiful. And it's beautiful, and they grow, and they grow. And how can that be? How can a tree grow in an environment like that? Because it's just not natural, is it? It's just wrong. Except trees are amazing survivors. Trees can do things that are amazing. And this is really what I want to talk about. Trees are amazing, and they do stuff, and we need to just acknowledge that they're amazing things. And look, it's a tree on top of a building. How cool is that? But also, this is in Chicago. Or might get Gary to do a weather report, but it's a fairly hostile environment at the best of times. Windy, hot, cold. But you've got a tree growing up there, So trees can just survive. They can do stuff. So clearly this is not a man-made feature, or not a natural feature, where this is. So this is called the Tree of Life in Lake Wanaka. Currently it's not being a tree of life. Any ideas why? Good for not answering. Thank you. The answer before did throw me, but it was the right answer, so I appreciate that. Again, the droughts we're having, like everyone's having, this tree is now being exposed to the air. How would you find that? And then people are going out to it and posing. And actually the tree is suffering from compaction and then overuse, being handled. But this tree actually, on a normal day, this is what this tree looks like. And it's growing in a lake. It's not much water, not very deep underwater. And it's a willow of sorts. But, heck, here's a tree growing underwater almost all year, more than the 270 days or whatever the days were. I mean, we're talking underwater. And trees can do that. And this is quite weird. So hold that thought. What we do to our trees. This is what I want to talk about. We've got our fantasy tree, we've got our fantasy place, we've got the place changing. We need to start working at what we do with our trees. So we know they're great survivors, we know they can function. And how many of you have trees, you can almost answer this question. How many of you have trees that haven't died when they should have died? You go, this tree's going to die, and they don't die. I'm confident you all have examples of that. I'm also confident you'll have examples of trees that haven't died when they should, and that's really annoying because they shouldn't die, but sometimes they do. And I put this down to the fact that trees are illiterate. I believe that trees can't actually read, and that's their problem because they don't know when they should die and when they shouldn't die. So hold that thought. So here's a tree. In Dunedin, Dunedin isn't all sunshine and roses. This was a lovely horizontal elm. It was just a beautiful, beautiful tree. Someone came along, I don't know why, and then they cut it. Perhaps it was some sort of therapy thing. Anyway, they cut this tree, and now it just looks ugly. But it didn't die. It would have been so nice if this tree died because that's ugly. There's another tree here. Birch trees, I don't know if there's a favourite whipping species of trees in your part of the world. In New Zealand, people hate birch trees. So much so that I've almost thought about creating a coffee table book about the horrid things people do to birch trees. So this is really common birch pruning. Let's find a tree and let's just cut it. And guess what? They just fluff up, Now it's a green fluffy blob and they're just horrible things. So people do that to our trees. Back in the olden days, we used to do stuff to our trees. So this is good old-fashioned cavity filling. I believe there's bricks behind that as well. So you've got to be grateful for the skill to involve to actually brick a tree up and then cap it with tin or whatever's in that. There's some quality workmanship in there. Completely wrong. We know it's terrible. We know it's wrong in every way, shape and form. We should admire the moment that it was done. I mean, that is beautiful. But what's the tree doing to it? The trees go, whatever. I'll just grow around it. I'll grow around it. I'm still going to rot or not rot depending on what I want to do. But they just survive. This one here is in Seoul. And this is really neat. So any ideas what's going on here? Way at the back. Good for not answering. This is cavity filling. So Seoul, interesting part of the world, and last night's after dinner speaker, who I can't see. The Japanese tree doctors are an amazing bunch of, I won't call them arborists, that'd probably be offensive, but they're tree doctors, they look after trees. And I was involved with a group that went there and we tried to sort of talk to these people and you say, look, what you're doing, this is cavity filling, Japanese tree doctor style. And it's beautiful. It is beautiful cavity filling. What you can't see is that they've actually scribed grain. So there's textured grain all the way through. This is a sculptured knot. Just a sheet of concrete that they've actually crafted. It's beautiful. That these tree doctors do. And we went to the tree doctors and said, look, actually, this is not good for trees. And they said very politely, how long have you been doing what you've been doing for? And we said, we're arborists. We first company started in, 1890 something. 200 years we've been doing this. And they said, yeah, come back in another 5,000 and talk to us. And you kind of go, awkward. Anyway, trees survive. They do that sort of stuff. Again, this is really old school. Back in the day, we used to trace, pruning cuts and used to trace them with this lovely pruning stuff. Again, trees grown over it, wounds there, whatever. So we do horrible things to trees, and our trees just deal with it because they do. even feel-good stuff. So this is a bit of, we've got to protect our trees. So we put our trees, bit of drums in, and that the sheep haven't got to the trees, and that's great, But the tree's just gone, yeah, whatever, I've got over this, and the trees just carry on growing. And, conceivably, they'll all rust off, and then the cattle will get them and they'll die, but still, the trees have just, they just live. That's just not right, because they don't read. So we know what we're doing. We know this sort of stuff. And then what we have to do is think about our natural environment. We had a lovely beech forest before, and I showed the beech forest, and it was beautiful. I had the botanic garden that we're all calm and tranquil about. And then I showed the outback Australia, which should have been just horrid. There was an Australian here. Has she gone? Oh well. So we're all brothers somewhere. The environment that we grow our trees in is just not nice. And what we're trying to do is create this natural environment. Well, we're not. We're not creating a natural environment. There is nothing natural about doing what we do. An English beech tree growing in the South Island of New Zealand is not natural. Let's just own that. Let's just accept that what we're doing is not natural. It's not good. It's not bad. It's not natural. So, and we know that trees are amazingly resilient. Last time I was with the AA, resilient was the buzzword of the day, and everything was resilient. I see it's been turned down a bit. There's some more words that we've used, but still, fundamentally, trees are great things, and they're lovely, and how can you not get excited about them? They are fantastic things. But what we can do with our trees, what we know we can do with our trees. Good old espalier, well, there's nothing natural about that, but it's not natural, it's okay. But look at it. You can manipulate this tree, we can bend this tree, we can fold this tree, we can do things with our trees because we can. And look, there's proof that we can do things with this tree. Here's a bunch of trees. People love or hate pollarding. I personally love it. This is in San Francisco. Gary, I think, had a slide somewhere of some pollarded trees. I think it's beautiful. But some people are wrong, So we've got these trees here. This is San Francisco, and they grow, and we know you can do this. So pollarding is just coppicing on a higher level, and I want to say there was a talk yesterday, and I can't recall who it was. I did actually make notes, but they're over there. Somebody had examples of coppice trees that were like 2,000 years old, and we know trees don't, in theory, shouldn't die. There's no sort of biological reason for a tree to die. I mean, they do, of course. But if we can manage these trees, they can be that size for a long, long time. We can coppice our trees 2,000 years. So in theory, we could keep these trees pretty much so that size for the next 2,000 years, which is ugly but kind of cool. And we know we can because we can. And we are doing that sort of stuff. Here's some other stuff too. So here is pruning. Well, this is not pruning practice. So this is hedging. Oh, it's different. It's hedging. You're just doing horrible things to our trees. I mean, this is Versailles. Versailles is amazing. It's an amazing garden. It's an amazing because of the horrible things they're doing to their trees. There's just avenues of horridness. But en masse, it is so beautiful. We could change the shape of our trees if we want to. I'm pretty sure this is maybe not the same photo, but this is the Hiroshima bonsai, 400 years old, in a pot. So, we know we can grow trees with, bad root zones. If we're worried about risk of a tree, well, no one's going to get killed by a falling branch from that, And if you're worried about trees growing under footpaths, well, we can do that. And we know we can do it because, look, we've been doing it for 400 years, so it can be done. And this is a natural shape. Let's not get into that being natural, not being natural. And we can also do this. And I'm not saying we should do this. I'm not saying I don't like elephants. That would be, no one should publicly say they don't dislike elephants. But you can do it. I mean, this is somewhere in the UK. I know this is somewhere in the UK. I know someone in this room knows where these trees are. I reckon someone in this room does this. Someone, you turn to the person next to you and go, who's doing this? But it can happen. I mean, we know this can happen. So we know we can get our trees. We know we can do horrible things to our trees. And we know that they will actually live. So in summary, summing up what I've been talking about, how am I going for time? How much time do you have? Ages. Oh, excellent. I didn't press your buttons. There's a thought. So change is the only constant. Way back when I started, which probably wasn't that way back ago, I said that we want to have this idea that we've got the tree in the perfect place. And the ability and the knowledge and the skill set in this room and in the greater arboricultural sort of sphere is that we can create the soils, we can create the planting pits, we can connect the soils, we can bring in the microflora and we can make all these things together. But we are only in control of so much. And then things happen which we're out of control of. And we're not talking about, lots of things. So many things we're out of control with that just happen. We have to accept that. And what we need, what I was saying, change is the only constant. We know that. We need to apply what we actually know. So, on that thought there, so we've got a tree that's growing. And all of a sudden, now the place that it was growing in, now there's a shortage of space. The new council come in, they want that space more than they want the tree. So we're left with this dilemma. Well, we have to have natural shaped trees, don't we? Because that's what trees look like. All our pruning standards are for natural shaped trees. So we have to have this tree looking natural, except the branches are now going to be over the road. Well, that's not going to work, is it? We have to have this tree looking natural, but the roots are going to be over here. We have to have this tree being natural, except there's not enough space for it. So what do? We complain, or we chop it down and plant something else. Well, my thought here is we don't actually chop it down. My thought is we can actually prune that tree. And I'm not saying we should go around willy-nilly pruning our trees, but we can do horrible things to trees, and our trees actually survive. So my thought here is that there's a damn good chance that something horrible will happen to our tree, and there's a damn good chance that that horrible thing won't kill it, because they don't actually die. How many in this room have actually tried to kill a tree and it hasn't died? It happens, and again, it's because they're illiterate. So the right tree in the right place. It is very unlikely for the trees, our urban trees, to actually stay in the right place for the entire time of life expectancy of their tree. And the amazing things that we've seen, the possibilities that we have here, are great and valid at the point of planting. They're great and valid at the point of the charter, the plan that these trees are going to live in, so the next 10 years. But the reality is that might not be the case. The reality is our trees probably won't be in the right place throughout the entire life of those trees. So for a tree to survive, it has to be manipulated, which sounds a bit weird. Oh, you're manipulating its trees. Oh, that's not right. But actually, we have been manipulating trees. We have been messing with our trees. We had a 400-year-old tree sitting on a tabletop. I mean, that is manipulation through and through. We had elephants. So we can mess with our trees. We can have trees growing in places, and it's not natural. And it's okay, because you've got a tree. So there's that thought. I can't know what the next slide is. We know we can manipulate trees. We know trees are great survivors. And we know that we're not actually recreated natural form and appearance for a tree. And I think if we the arborist community, actually accept that, it's okay that we're creating elephants. Well, not the elephants, not okay about the elephants. But it's okay that we can do things to our trees. It's okay that we can prune a tree to fit a space. The worst thing that we do with our trees is not carry on with some pruning stage. So if you turn your tree into an elephant, you have to keep it as an elephant, What is worse is if you stop calling it an elephant, let it grow back into a tree, then bad things will happen. So trees are amazing. This is my last slide here. Trees are amazing, resilient. Those that manage them need to become equally as resilient. I think there's going to be a point in time where we have to embrace doing horrible things to our trees. I'm pretty sure that's me. I have put forward some horrible things to trees in our local town. I said, look, here's some horrible stuff, but I'd rather have something horrible than nothing at all. And by heck, the back, there's some negative feedback for doing that. but I'm okay with that. We've got a tree. We've got half a tree, which is better than no tree at all. So that's me. I'm Mark Roberts. Thank you very much for listening.
So that's it for this first edition of Tree of the Best. I hope you enjoyed it. We're planning to produce quite a few of these in the coming weeks and months, so if there's any presentations you would like to see again, particularly from 2018 and 2019 when we've got the footage, or if there's any combinations of talks you think would go well together, then please do let us know. We'd be very interested to hear your feedback. So stay safe, look after yourselves, and speak to you soon. Thank you.